we'll consider variable scope. When we're talking about functions, we want to know where the variable is recognized. So I'm just going to try a bit of code. Got my button on here, so double click and try and paste that code in there. That code should work. Let's try it. Click our button. Well, we didn't see much happening, but maybe I'll just put a breakpoint in here and see how it works. So it goes to sub1 and it actually calls sub1. So if I do F8, it calls sub1 and it dims I as an integer. I's got the value of 0 at the moment, but then it gives the value of I equals 1 and finishes, and that's all it does. So I'll F8, all that does at the moment. But if I F8, it jumps out, and now sub2 is called. It goes down and dims I as an integer, puts I equal to 2 this time, and then finishes up. The question is, what are those I's connected? No, absolutely not. They are completely independent. This I here and this I have got nothing to do with each other. I try and think of them in terms of, that looks like a red eye and this one is a blue eye. They are completely different, isolated variables. You might as well call them a different name, J for all that matters. Well, you can confirm that, because if I actually just comment that out, you'll see that the program now complains variable not defined. So you need to dim the variable inside as well. So this is local. This I, if I undo it, that is local to that sub. Well, what about if we did this? I'm going to delete this dim and I'm going to move this dim outside into the general declarations. Do you think that's going to work? Let's find out. Well, it won't work if you don't spell it properly. Well, let's see if it works. Still doesn't. Okay. I'll just stop that and run it. So you'll see that it actually did work. What we're doing is we're dimming I as an integer. Now I is declared in the general declarations, and then it will then be available to all of the subs beneath it, any code beneath it in a sub or a function. Now you might say, well, hey, I'm going to use that all the time. Why should I go and bother to dim that in each sub just like that? Isn't that a better idea? Well, it'll certainly, that is a better idea if I just get rid of this, because it's not a good idea to declare it in the general declarations. It's much better to declare it as locally as you can. And you say, well, why should I bother? I mean, I can just dim it up there. It makes life easy. Yeah, it does for the moment, but when you get an error, you'd like to know where your error occurred. So if you dim, the rule is dim as locally as possible. And then it's much easier to find your error. You must imagine this is like thousands of lines of code. And you want to know where the error occurred. It's much easier if you dim your variables as locally as possible. It's much easier to find where your errors are. We can talk about the variable lifetime. Lifetime determines where in the program the variable is remembered. Well, let's just take a look at this bit of code we've got here. And we can paste that bit of code into our command button. And we want to use in this case we're just using an ordinary dim. I'm going to change that in a moment to static, and we'll see what effect that has. But let's see what it does at the moment. If I run that bit of code, it's simply going to message box I, and I hasn't been initialized, so it's got the value of 0, and every time you run the program it will give you 0. But watch this. If I change this to static, then static means the opposite to static. It means change it every time it does the program. So if I run that, you watch what happens. It'll give you the value of 0 to start off with, but next time you click the button, it remembers what the previous value was and will increment that by 1. Well, let's talk about the message box function, a special type of function. If we try this particular bit of code out, dim access integer. Now this time it's a function, so it's returning a value, and instead of, we've been used to having a message box statement, but we can have these bits and pieces in here. So if we run that, you can see that the test is the heading up here, and the click is in here, and 4 is the type. The type is got a yes/no button, because if we were to dismiss that first, and if we were to go to get help on that by pressing F1, you can see the message box function, which is useful. These are all the types of buttons, VK only and so on. That's it. So at the moment we've got button 4, which is as you can see down here, is a yes/no button. We can take a look at the help on this. We've got here that the prompt and then the title and the buttons. So we can actually try those, prompt and buttons and so on. So I can use what we call name parameters. Now you'll see how that the prompt := you must remember that as a name parameter, and then the buttons you see is the number 4 once again. You could actually use that constant VBACh10b in here. And once again, title with a colon equals this a name parameter. The advantage of using that is you can leave out some of your parameters, whereas if you did it the other way, you'd have to put commas, comma, where there was bits missing. So this is an easier way to do it. If I just move that around, I'll get rid of that comma as well. If I move it to the end and try it again, you'll find that still works. We can also pick up the values of the value of x. So we could indeed test for the value of x like this. We can have an if statement. If x has got the value of VB which is some sort of a constant, we could look down here and find what the value of that constant is. But it's much easier to use named constants so you know what you're doing. Else if it's yes, then message box. Great. Well, let's just see if that works. So when we click yes, it says great, and run it again. This time click no, and so that's how we test the value of the message box function. We previously talked about a user-defined function. A user-defined function is something you type in Excel just as if it were an Excel function. But I will just go through it again because it's quite important. We start off, we'll get rid of a command button. We're not using command buttons at all. We're going to be using a user-defined function. In order to do that, we've got to go to we've got to insert a module. So insert a module, and there's our module. And now we need to paste. Well, we need to type this code in. So I'll just copy it across for the moment. That was our user-defined function. It must be written in a module, not a code sheet. Corresponding to that, we've got I'll get rid of that command button. We're not talking about command buttons. We'll put a value in here, any value that you like, so that we're going to actually multiply that value by the rate. So what I'll do is to type in here, I'm going to copy this here, copy the name. That's a bit going to extremes really, but I do like copying things into. Now you notice that the $has actually appeared here as like all the other Excel functions, but our own little function has appeared. So I'll say $, here, and then I'm going to click on A2 and then close it. Now watch what happens as I press the enter key. It calculates the value. What I'll do, I'll just put a breakpoint in here, Now I'm going to run that again. To run it again, I can just click on that end of the function, my user-defined function, and then press the enter key, and it jumps in there. Now the important thing to notice is the 2.5 is actually passed, is the A2 obviously. Now that A2 is passed here into ST, and you can see that if you hold it on there, you'll see that ST has got the value of 2.5. It's rather clever. So from Excel, it's been brought into VBA. And you can see the rate has got the value of 0 at the moment, but if I press F8, it's going to have the value of 1.5. Now, being a function, as we've talked about functions, that's got to be the same as that. You must have the same name to end off at the end, and then I'm going to press, that should now, F8, that's 0 at the moment. If I press, then it calculates the value of 3.75 and puts it back into this cell here, B1. So I'll press F8 again, and you can see the value is returned. We did mention that user-defined functions do have limitations. If you read here that it says it can't actually put values back into the cell, well, hello, that's quite a disadvantage. So you have to work around that. But isn't it nice? You can make your own functions and give that to the customer, and he or she can just use that as if it's an Excel function.